Welcome back. Well, Theresa May has this week travelled to Brussels and Dublin to try and renegotiate the Irish backstop. So far, seemingly without much luck. Well, joining us now is the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Truss.
Good morning, Sophie.
Well, it's the first time I've interviewed you on the show, so I'm very keen to try and find out your Brexit red lines. Because this week, Jeremy Corbyn has kind of set out what could be seen as a path to a deal through a permanent customs union. Is that something that you could back?
Well, first of all, I do think that Jeremy Corbyn's position on Brexit is better than Tony Blair. At least he's acknowledging the referendum happened and that we need to move forward. But fundamentally, we need to have an independent trade policy. That's what we set out in our manifesto. That is what we need to be able to have the freedom to succeed after Brexit. So the customs union isn't the right approach. And what we showed 2 weeks ago in Parliament is we do have a way through. The Brady Amendment got the support of a majority in Parliament.
Yeah, but it's not going to get the support from the EU. That's the problem, isn't it? It's a two-way negotiation.
I believe it is, and we've already seen movement from the EU. They've already said they're prepared to come back to the table and talk about the opportunities.
Well,
we've got three proposals on the table, so the time limit, the unilateral exit mechanism, looking at alternative arrangements. And I believe Theresa May can get that deal. I mean, this is one element of the withdrawal agreement that the Conservative Party and others had an issue with. In fact, Jeremy Corbyn himself has said that the backstop is an issue. The EU have indicated that there can be further discussions. We now need to get that done.
They haven't indicated that they're going to budge on the backstop at all.
But before any negotiation, nobody goes in saying, I'm going to give up all the things I've previously said. They don't say that. But the fact is the EU do want a deal. This is one element. They've always said...
This isn't the beginning of the negotiations.
Sophie, they've always said that the backstop is a temporary measure. Now, what we want to do is make sure that's properly in law, that it is either temporary or we've got a unilateral exit mechanism. And that, to me, is the way through. That is the pathway to the future. It commands the support of Conservative MPs. It commands the support of quite a number of Labour MPs in Leave-leaning seats. And that is the majority. And if you remember, a few weeks ago, the EU was saying, there's nothing that commands a majority in the House of Commons. Britain, please tell us what you want. We've told them what we want, and now's the time to deliver it. And, I appreciate Jeremy Corbyn has come to the table, but the reality is what he's proposing does not deliver on what we want as a country.
Just to be really clear, if it were to become government policy to pursue a customs union, would you resign?
It is not government policy to pursue...
But I'm trying to find your red lines.
What I'm saying is I want an independent trade policy. I think that's incredibly important. And I don't think we would command the support of Parliament
if we had such a policy that pursued a permanent...
I absolutely do not think that should be our policy.
OK. Not quite the answer to the question, but I do see where you're coming from. Now, less than 50 days to... Brexit. If MPs can't reach an agreement by the end of March, do you think there should be an extension to Article 50?
Well, I believe that MPs will reach an agreement by the end of March. And I think, in any negotiation, in any piece of work, as the deadline approaches, minds get focused and a deal gets done. And I think by extending the deadline, that doesn't create any new information. All that does is delay things. I think that would be a very bad idea.
Are you worried about a no-deal Brexit?
Well, I don't want a no-deal Brexit, but we are prepared for it, and we will have to do it if absolutely necessary. But I don't believe it will be necessary. And the best way to avoid a no-deal Brexit is getting the deal the Prime Minister's laid out. And that's as...
Now, I'm keen to get your comments on another story that's been in the news today about Amber Rudd, the Work and Pension Secretary, who has announced this crackdown on bosses who mismanage pension schemes. Can you just explain what the aim is there?
Well, what this is all about is it's about organisations like Philip Green's organisation, where there have been issues with pension schemes being mismanaged. And it's about saying that's not acceptable. It's not acceptable to play merry hell with the contributions workers have made over a period of time and essentially run off without making good the pensions you've promised to those people in the future and saying we'll take further sanctions. I mean, on the Philip Green issue, I do think it is disgraceful that he has been able to use non-disclosure agreements to effectively silence victims of sexual and racial abuse. And I think we need to look seriously at those non-disclosure agreements and get changes to them because I think it's completely wrong that people like Philip Green have been able to flout the law.
OK. Now, this week, your Conservative colleague, Christopher Chope, blocked some legislation on female genital mutilation. I mean, you've been speaking out about this on Twitter. What went through your mind when you first saw that had happened?
I was just absolutely appalled, because we know there has only been one conviction against somebody for female genital mutilation. This is an action that harms the lives of girls. This is happening in our country in the 21st century. I find that appalling. And we need to do much, much more to stop it. And when I see one of my colleagues opposing a measure that could have saved girls' lives, could have saved girls from that horrendous experience, I am absolutely appalled by that.
Are you ashamed to be sitting on the same benches as him?
Well, I'm going to be speaking to him this week. I want to see him change his mind. I want to see the Conservative Party make sure that we show that that is completely unacceptable.
So you say you're going to speak to him this week. What if you ask for a meeting? What are you going to be doing?
Well, I will be looking for him around the Commons, because...
To collar him?
And I think Conservatives do need to put peer pressure on our colleagues who are stopping these types of things happening. This is a very, very serious issue. It's been a serious issue in this country for some time. Girls' lives are at threat, and that is appalling that we weren't able to put that legislation through.
Should he have the whip removed?
I know that the government, now the Chief Whip, has said he is going to find the space to put that through in government time. I think that's very positive. So we will take action against and on this issue.
So should he have the whip removed, do you think?
I want to change his mind. I think the way you win in politics is by bringing people over to your point of view. I don't like the kind of deselection-itis that's going on in the Labour Party. I think it's highly, highly destructive. But I do think we need, as a Conservative Party, to tackle the real issues of modern Britain. And for female genital mutilation to go on, for those girls to be under threat and us not taking action on it, I think is something that isn't acceptable.
I mean, one of the other issues of the modern world is social media. It's something that I was talking about with my previous guest, Labour's Shadow Health Secretary. So I'm interested from your perspective, because I know that you're someone who doesn't really like new laws and legislation necessarily, but do you think there should be more regulation on social media companies?
So I'm a parent of two daughters, one of which has a mobile phone, so I completely understand where parents are coming from. And I do my best to, limit use, make sure the phone has a curfew, not use.
You lock it in a box, is that right?
I do lock it in a box at night and, make sure those rules. But I think all parents get worried about exactly what might be happening. You can't have 24-hour surveillance on your children. And I do think that companies have a responsibility, schools have a responsibility. I was very pleased by the announcement last week that we're seeking to get more schools to ban mobile phone use in schools. But when it comes to regulation, we need to make sure we get that regulation right, because what can sometimes inadvertently happen is you end up putting power in the hands of the big companies, the companies with the big legal departments, the companies that can deal with these issues. And we don't want to be in a position where social media companies become the censors, where they become the arbiters of what's right and what's wrong. And I think ultimately, yes, the government does need to look at the regulatory landscape. We are about to launch our white paper on online. And we need to look at all of the bodies we've got at the moment. So we've got a broadcasting standards body, an advertising standards authority. And I think what's changed since we put all those regulatory bodies in place is, they were before we had online media. And I think that whatever content it is, we need to think about it in a similar fashion. It shouldn't matter whether it's on TV or whether it's online. We need to look at it across the board.
It's interesting hearing you talk about regulation there. You're someone who I know often speaks out about too much regulation, not being used in the right way. So I just wondered, do you think sometimes that the modern day Conservative Party has strayed a bit far from its Thatcherite principles?
I think sometimes we can end up having quite a lot of micro-regulation, but that doesn't mean to say we don't need really tough regulation in areas like competition, in areas like unfair practice. But sometimes having too much regulation can actually stop taking the big decisions that we need to take. So I'm not against regulation in principle. What I'm saying is we have to be very, very careful that the regulation that is in place isn't just benefiting the big players in the market and actually stopping people enter markets. I meet a lot of small businesses across the country, and what they often say to me is, we have to go through so many different government bodies. Okay. We have to get so many permissions. It's actually really difficult for us to compete with the big energy companies or the big mobile phone companies. So we've got to be, yes, we have to have regulation, but we need to make sure it's simple, we need to make sure it's transparent, and we need to make sure it benefits the consumer and not those vested interests who are already operating in the market.
Now, I'm being told in my ear that we're out of time, but there is one more question I do want to ask you, so I'm just going to squeeze it in anyway. Now, you gave a speech on Monday where you talked about women, and so I just want to have a quick look about what you did say about women. We're brought up to be compliant, to behave yourself. Well, I say no to that. I think we need to be disruptive. Are you disruptive? What's the most disruptive thing you've done?
Well, I do...
Other than collaring Christopher Chope in the House of Commons.
Well, I do try and I make a conscious decision to try and speak out, because I am at the top table in government, and quite often there can be pressure to always go along with what, you know, the party wants, or to not speak out. And
do you get mansplained too sometimes?
Of course. Yeah, and I think it happens in every walk of life. I used to work in the oil industry. I'm familiar with the practice of mansplaining, and there are quite a lot of people in my party and others who think they know best, and they think they know more than you and will like to tell you what you say. And I think you often have to think, what is the most outrageous thing I could say, and actually decide to say it. And I think...
Go on then, feel free. You've got a platform.
I've got a platform, Sophie. Well, what I was trying to say about women is that too often girls are taught to be compliant, they're taught to be good, they're taught to behave themselves. And actually the most successful women, those who do things differently, you know, Theresa May was somebody who spoke out when she made the speech about the nasty party. Mrs. Thatcher was a leader who didn't always take things lying down. And I want to encourage the next generation of business women in particular to be prepared to say those things and take those steps.
OK, Liz Truss, thank you very much.